Well, I'm joined by Dr. Mike Jones, Executive Director of Migration Watch UK, and Omar Hammoud-Gallego, Fellow in Political Science and Public Policy at the LSE. Let's begin, shall we, Dr. Mike? Let's just look at the cold numbers.
Sure. Well, in terms of legal migration, the number of visas issued is around 1.4 million.
1.4 million.
So breaking this down, the number of people on the skilled worker visa is around 330,000. So that's about a 26% increase. The number of people on the health and care visa is around 150,000. Mm-hmm. So that's an increase of, 90%. Mm-hmm. Dependents are around 270,000. That's an increase of around 80%. The number of students is around 450,000. That's an increase of 70% compared to 2019. And then you've got a cohort of family visas, that's around 81,000. That's an increase of about 70%. And then you have smaller groups, on the BNO Hong Kong visa, the Ukraine resettlement program. But, it's increases across the board.
Yeah, I think many people would say, well, the Ukraine situation, the Hong Kong situation could be one-offs. And they could argue that. But I want to just hone in on something. The number of dependents. Mm-hmm. 270,000 dependents. And these are dependents of care workers. They say the rules are changing.
Yeah.
Isn't that politically the most explosive figure here?
Absolutely. Restricting the number of dependents is low-hanging fruit because many of these people are economically inactive. So in terms of, looking at the Treasury and the fiscal impact of immigration, this is an obvious area to cut. So, banning certain groups of dependents for, say, postgraduate students or care workers, that's very much the most logical place to start.
Can someone explain to me why students brought dependents in?
They were mostly attached to postgraduates. So the composition...
So what, partners, perhaps?
Yeah, spouses, right. Children, so on. And that took place essentially because the composition of the postgraduate student population changed. Historically, it's mostly been students from China, but Chinese students bring very few dependents with them. But we've seen a shift more towards, India and Nigeria, and the government has specifically targeted those national groups. And obviously, because of, cultural differences in family formation, they tend to bring more dependents with them. And obviously the student visas
does make you question the economic so-called benefits. One thing, though, we have to give them credit for is the figures show a 36% decrease in those crossing the English Channel. But I'm really sorry, Mr. Cleverly, you kept telling us in the last couple of months of last year that it was, because of government policy working. I kept saying the weather was rotten. You even said over Christmas, for the first time since 2018, nobody's arrived over Christmas. And I was Christmasing on the Kent coast and it was getting up to 50-mile-an-hour winds every day. The Home Office did say one of the reasons the numbers are down is the very bad weather in the last quarter of last year. So I hope, Mr. Cleverly, you withdraw those statements. Let's think about this, Omar, a bit more deeply. I sort of postulated at the beginning there that one of the reasons for this is the so-called insatiable shortage of labour, or more cynically, the demand of big employers to have a lot of cheap labour. Why have do you think the Conservatives have genuinely tried to get numbers down or not?
I think the Conservatives know that the economy needs these workers, right? So I think here's a clear point of disagreement. Many of the people that come here come because since Brexit happened, the migration system has changed, and now people that come because they have an offer from employers. The NHS now has over 100,000 vacancies. So the point is, we might want to reach an artificial target of 50,000, 10,000 migrants coming into the country, but many of these people come in because the economy needs them. Now, many of them not necessarily do jobs that some of them do the jobs that English people don't want to do, British people don't want to do.
That's the story. That's the story we're told. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But that could be about money, couldn't it? Because my observation going back to 2004 was that when you have a huge amount of foreign labour, particularly unskilled foreign labour, coming into the country, that the minimum wage becomes the maximum wage, and that means the difference between being on benefits and working is pretty marginal for British nationals.
But the issue is that many of them, if we wanted to increase, let's say, the salaries of care workers, of NHS staff, to get more British people working into these sectors, we could do this, but that would increase the bills, of course, for British nationals. So there's a trade-off here. We can get people that are clearly qualified, that do the jobs that we need, and effectively, especially in the NHS, if we don't get these people now, before we train nurses and doctors and all of that, that will take several years.
The lack of skills, there is a time lag. I've been saying this for 20 years. Why is everybody doing social sciences when we need nurses, engineers, and they've been shortages for a long, long time? No, I fully understand that point. But you know something? When Tony Blair came to office, we had 58 million people. We've now got 68 million people. That's going to be 75 million people by 2036 on current projections. And actually, and we can argue whether GDP goes up by 0.1% a year, and we can argue that we might be short of baristas or whatever it may be. But actually, the impact of a population explosion on the lives of ordinary people is now being seen to turn negative, isn't it?
Well, I would disagree with that. I think when we know very well, the economics speak very clearly. When people come in, migrants are younger. They are many of them are highly skilled. When the economy needs them, they contribute. They are less likely to use social services like the NHS, the schools, etc.
But they need houses.
Of course,
they need places to live.
Absolutely, they do. But we also need that. And the fact is that the government hasn't produced them neither for them nor for us. Right? And that's the big issue. You can't blame migrants for something that actually is the government's fault for many years, decades.
If public policy can't anticipate how many are coming, it's difficult to know what to build.
But it's not a problem of public policy per se. It's a political issue. It's the issue that there's so much NIMBYism in this country that effectively we're not increasing the supply of housing as we need.
I believe the social side of this has been negative, firmly, but that's a subjective comment. On the more objective economic point, Mike, and I can remember, arguing this with the BBC's Nick Robinson 10 years ago, that he's, GDP goes up by 0.1% a year, but then GDP per capita actually isn't going up. In fact, it's going down. Is there now a case that can be made that mass migration on this scale is not an economic benefit?
Oh, absolutely. The case has been there for decades. There's a difference between growing the economic pie. If you increase the size of the population, obviously you're going to increase the size of GDP, which is, the total number of goods and services. But real wealth is created through GDP per capita, which is per person. And there are many smaller countries with smallish populations that are wealthier than the UK or wealthier than countries with larger populations, Singapore, Norway, Switzerland. So ultimately, it's about human capital, skills, competence, and investment in the capital stock. So it's about the quality of your population rather than sheer quantity. And there are actually, what they call externalities in terms of having a higher population. You mentioned the pressure on housing.
Roads, housing,
infrastructure,
health, education.
And social capital.
Education's a big one, of course, because a lot of people who come are younger, have quite big families. Look, we may have a Labour government in a few months' time. Who's to say? They're looking at a sort of returns deal with the EU that could even increase numbers. Are we just going to go on, do you think, with our population exponentially growing?
The amount of migrants coming in is not so much the issue, I think. The issue is how do we give a sense to citizens that effectively the numbers, that the borders are controlled and that the numbers are, if you want, part of a bigger plan or a long-term plan. And I don't see the issue. I don't agree with the fact that the population is increasing because of migrants, and that is necessarily a bad thing.
It is.
Think of countries such as Canada. Think of Australia.
Well, they've got rather more room than we have. But if you what is a fact is that 85% of the 10 million growth since 1997 is directly down to migration and migrants having children. That's a fact. Whether it's good or bad is the thing we can argue about. But what is interesting, is that David Neil, who was recently sacked by the Home Secretary, his papers have been published over the course of the last hour. And he says our border protection, this is on illegal immigration, our border protection is neither effective nor is it efficient. He says all the recommendations he's made haven't been listened to. That's one area. Illegal immigration, the British public overwhelmingly are demanding their politicians do something. Why don't they?
Well, the fact is that, first of all, just to make clear, the amount of people coming in by boat is an extremely small amount compared to the overall migration numbers, right? So last year, around 36,000 people came in by boat, which is, compared to the million and some and more than have come, of course, it's a very small percentage.
But it's very visible.
It is a very visible one because politicians want to make it visible. But that's another issue.
No. They want to hide it. I made it visible.
Yeah, I was talking about you. But the issue is rather, if you look at the data, the latest Home Office data show that 2/3 of the ones that have come and applied for asylum have actually been accepted.
Which is truly extraordinary.
Extraordinary, right?
How on earth that's happened?
It means that effectively many of them are genuine refugees.
Well,
and so the question is,
we've been granting asylum to Albanians when France and Germany give zero. I mean,
But Albania is a different case, and now there is a clear agreement. There is a return agreement with Albania because effectively it's a safe country.
If you can't return people to other parts of the world, It seems to me they've taken the view, just let them stay. I'm going to give a final word on this good debate to Mike. Illegal immigration, promise after promise after promise. Rhetoric being upped and upped. Home secretaries, I'm putting the Royal Navy in the Channel. Not much is changing, is it?
No, the numbers have come down slightly, but that's due to the returns policy that Rishi Sunak has of Albania.
Yeah, now, and the weather.
And the weather.
Yeah.
But the most fundamental question in illegal migration policy is this. If somebody arrives in your territory illegally, can you deport them to their country of origin or a third safe country like Rwanda? In many cases, we can't do that. You look at the top 3 nationalities of people coming to the UK via small boats. Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey. Rishi Sunak thrashed out a returns policy with the Turkish government, but what happened?
It doesn't seem to be working. Do you know what, folks? We could discuss this forever. The numbers are the numbers. They can't be disputed. They show some massive increases year on year, despite all the promises. I don't think this government's going to get rid of it. I don't think the next government is going to get rid of it either. And I think overall, I think it's a negative. It is a great debate.